freedom value of privacy would be comparing closer to homosexuality to a gay pride parade. So you have people who are forced in a homophobic society to live their identity in privacy, and whereas you would say that if they can make a gay pride parade, that is certainly a more free image and that is certainly a more free society. So you would say that a homophobic society offers less freedom, whereas a more tolerant society offers more freedom. And the interesting thing is, how did homosexuality create its freedom to, for example, make a gay pride parade? Not by enhancing the walls of privacy and hiding more and more, but actually through the voluntary coming out or the involuntary outing of more and more people as homosexuals in the public sphere. So I think after looking at some of these attributes and examples, I must conclude that privacy is of ambiguous value at best for things like freedom or identity. Identity is another thing, because privacy always assumes that there's this personal core that you have to respect, and that is basically what makes you the person that you are. And one can argue whether you really have a one certain static personal core that has to be respected and that is not connected and defined by the environment. So anyway, this is a thing of the past. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But let's look at the world that may be coming, in the post-private world. Actually, I think one could create some optimistic ideas about what such a world would look like by looking at the way the information economy nowadays starts to work. Privacy is an instrument of information, so maybe we should look at some examples of current information economies. For example, we have this idea that sharing is a good idea, and that sharing may be a better idea than prohibitively protecting or hiding information. So you have the idea of a non-zero sum game in new current information economies, where it is better to give, that is, you cannot lose information, but you can let other people participate in the information and share the information, and that you get more back by sharing information than by hiding information. So there is the idea that more information may actually in many circumstances be better than less information. For example, markets run better if there's more information provided and, of course, distributed somewhat evenly. And maybe information also becomes more valuable even to the owner, who has to give up some privacy of the information if it is shared. So, for example, he can inform people about what he likes, and thereby people can better give him what he likes than if they would not know what he likes. So that is an example of an information that, if shared, is more valuable to the owner. And now look at what becomes of the information machinery around us, this growing intelligence that collects more and more information and also interconnects us more and more with other people who look closely at our intelligence and interconnect with that. So I think I like the sci-fi image of the hive mind, that is some kind of global intelligence of many, many minds connected. Something like the Borg maybe, but maybe the Borg image is somewhat imperfect if we compare it to what is really happening right now. So anyway, the interconnected network of many minds and many informations and many intelligences is growing and growing and growing, even if you participate or if you do not participate. If you interconnect your intelligence, your knowledge, your thinking with it, or if you do not. So you cannot fight it by abstaining from it, but maybe you can earn something from participating in it. That is, you can participate in a growing superintelligence that offers you more intellectual and knowledge potential than you would have in your own isolated mind. And that may be a good thing, having superintelligence available to you, and also providing your own viewpoint of things into this superintelligence, instead of refusing to open your to share your viewpoint of things with this intelligence, because thereby you can make sure that a piece of your identity may be in this hive mind instead of not being in this hive mind. You may gain more by participating than you lose. So the question is, what might you lose? Well, some ideas would be maybe you lose some individuality or autonomy. So that's basically the idea that by participating in this new growing social consciousness, you become more conformistic and somewhat less weird because you conform more to social norms. So I wonder if that is really what is happening. Here's some furries to scare you and to maybe make you think about the next slide. That is that this social space that you are interconnected into is actually getting redefined in what normality means for it. So you have the old case where you say in a collectivistic totalitarian state, it basically tries to put conformism on everyone who participates in it and who is part of it. Whereas I would say that right now we have more a situation, for example, in the internet, where many people participate in one huge social sphere and social interconnectedness, but not in a way that makes them more and more alike, but actually in a way that enforces difference. Because to the growing information machinery, difference is good because difference is information. The machine grows by gathering more and more intelligence and by learning more and more about unexpected things. It likes things that are not yet known by it, because through that it can grow further and further. So difference is information, difference is good, and thereby actually it craves difference, and thereby we do not have a situation where people are forced into conforming, but more in a situation where the individuality or the individuality of your personality is something that is valuable to this machine. So you have the situation where we are more working with making the world that you communicate conform to your individual worldview, like in the case of personalization, than of making you conform to the world. So in a way, the new normality is actually a lack of normality that presses you into being alike with each other. There is no escape from this ever-increasing diversity, because the more people with individuality that are integrated into the system, the more these people's individuality is increased. And for example, they find other people who share the same weird fetishes with them, and so that affirms them in their interests, and they can exchange tentacle porn, and thereby their fetish for tentacle porn can grow even further and deeper, and they become more and more different from other people who are not like them. And if this diversity is growing and growing and growing, and society has to deal with that, that forces society to become more tolerant. Because society would otherwise be not flexible enough to keep all its participants together, and it would break, it would collapse. So the old privacy example of you should worry about what happens with your data on the internet, because one day you wouldn't find a job because your employer will see that you are really weird and do stupid things. I think one can question this assumption, because first of all, the employer would not find any untarnished candidates, because the world is post-private and every weirdness is at once brought out to the open, and we can very much assume that every person has nowadays something to hide, because every person in her own personal way is somewhat weird or somewhat stupid or somewhat non-conformistic or somewhat criminal. One can assume that either the employer has many candidates who are all a little weird, and he has to accept that, or he chooses candidates who do not have any data on them on the net. And I don't think that this would reassure him that these are good candidates, but more it would make him suspicious, because someone who has not records on him may be someone who has done something really bad and had to have this has to hide that. So this person with the empty record may actually be the person who is worse off. And on the other hand, since in this new information society, difference is good, and thereby the unexpected is good, the employer might actually want people who offer originality, because everything else can be outsourced or automatized. And so if behavior is predictable, you can write an algorithm for it in a way, or you can outsource it to people who do not have to provide very much new intelligence to the problems that you are having. But if you have to deal with unpredictable situations, and then you have to have people who can who can act spontaneously in new ways and can offer new solutions, and that can be only found in people who are willing to open themselves, for example, to difference and to deal with unexpected situations and so on. And I think that can be more easily found in people that, according to current definitions, would be considered weird or nerds or something like that, than in people who conform totally and never have problems fitting into any society that surrounds them. So then we have the question of identity. And of course, if we say privacy is important to protect your identity and to make sure that your identity grows in a healthy way, that you grow to be someone different from the others, then we can look at what happens to identity right now already. So I think identity becomes more fluent and more volatile. So, for example, you have this situations where where one human can constitute many different identities. Of course, we had that in the past. We had always this assumption that people play many different roles in many different social contexts. But it's become more and more not only a question of playing different roles, but really of creating and constituting complete, full-blown personalities. So in a way, we were trained through that in the past by, for example, role-playing games, and we went from that to really learning how to define ourselves, for example, in profiles, on profile pages of different social networks, and by creating somewhat different personality for each social network. And now we have situations where, for example, people can have an identity in Second Life, and that is an identity that is fully functional, not only a game, a playing, but something, for example, that can generate money for them, that can participate in an economy, can participate in politics, and still this is a completely different personality than, for example, they would have when they deal with their family. I think this is enforced more and more by the freedoms of the digital space to play and to enact and to constitute new identities. And you also have the other situations where identities are constituted not by one human but by many humans. So think, for example, of Anonymous, where you have some very strange multi-person identity where you cannot find a single core to make responsible, for example, through law to bring to justice, because you have one identity that is mapped in a very complex way to the brains of many humans, and especially to a changing set of humans. So in a way, you lose the idea of a static core identity that is what you really are and what you will always be, and that is, for example, what you were born into because of your genetics and because of your inherent goodness or your inherent morality. Instead, you have more and more dynamism in your identity. So, for example, the fact that on Twitter you have a very fine mapping of your mood changes over minutes in some cases, means that it becomes more and more difficult to create one coherent image of your identity. It's more like you change very spontaneously what makes you. So you may have have a situation where, for example, the identification of who you are psychologically, politically, or something like that changes very quickly, because you have recordings of everything, but you spontaneously change your opinion, or you change your opinion for good reasons, and later these recordings show what opinion you had or what your identity was maybe a year ago, but you cannot really take that anymore as a source to identify what your opinion is now, what your identity is now. So even though every